Let's take a look at the 5th Gen RAV4 market. The 5th Gen in the US was offered for 2019 all the way to 2025. 2026 is when we see the 6th generation RAV4. Where I like to start with this is looking at where's the market today versus just a month ago. We look a month ago, 65,000 of these available versus today, well over 82,000, which is great because more inventory equals more available to choose from. And then when it comes to negotiating with the dealer on price, I have more comparables to draw against. The next thing I want to look at is, well, what trim am I going to want? Now, I'm assuming at this point you've watched the videos on the ins and outs of the cars to figure out these are the features I want and don't necessarily need. In this case, I'm just going to select XLE, but just know that this process we're going to go through will work regardless of what trim or combination and spec you want. Okay, next question to answer is fuel type and drivetrain. And I could go hybrid or gas, four-wheel drive versus front-wheel drive. And maybe that answer is easier on the drivetrain side, especially if I live in an environment with inclement weather like snow. But for this example, it's interesting to see the pricing premium over, say, gas and hybrid and four-wheel drive versus front-wheel drive. In this case, I'm going to go gas and four-wheel drive. And when I go back up, our next selection is, where do I focus my attention? There's 14,000 of these that are out there. Like, where do I go next? For me, I focus on model year. And you see the relationship here between the new 2025s at about 36,000 all the way down to 2019s of averaging around $24,000 in list price. Interesting though, in the middle, 22 and 23. They're in lockstep with each other. But what's different here between 22 and 23 is we saw 23 get the better infotainment, and 23 is also going to be more likely to still be within both the basic 3-year 36,000 mile warranty and the 5-year 60,000 mile powertrain warranty coming directly from Toyota. So why would I spend the same amount of money on the 22 when I can get a 23? And recognize that much of this will also be dependent on budget. But this process we're going to go through next will be the same regardless of kind of where you fall in budget and what model years ended up being in there. In this case, I'm going to focus my attention on the 23s. And before we go and look at the listings, I like to draw in on the aggregate. Look at these chunks. You see these chunkings here within the price and the miles? Let's focus our attention and see how these things are all represented. And what I'm really curious to see is there really a drop-off in price between, after that powertrain warranty expires? Like, all of a sudden, do they just get half off because they're now out of powertrain warranty? Well, let's go ahead and take a look. When we look at the market, we see where these are all listed, and we see the large concentration of them here across the continental United States. We look next at the price and mileage relationship and see this linear depreciation that's happening as more miles are accumulated on these cars. Again, these are what the dealers are asking for. This is what they're listing their price at. And we'll get into that conversation in just a minute. But there's a couple interesting sweet spots to note here. First is that I'm paying my most attention to the darker shades of blue because this is where the aggregate of the listings are. I'm not focusing so much on the lower end of this band because this is where you're more likely to see those vehicles with damage reported, accidents, salvage titles, etc. With so many of these available out there, we'll start with the aggregate first that are most likely to have clean titles. When we look at these pricing, we see this step up here between 50, 40,000 to about 30,000 miles, and a spread here between $29,000 and $26,000. When we think back to the 2025s, their average list price for the XLE with four-wheel drive and gas is about $36,000. Our goal here should be to try to get the best savings possible from that 2025 with just a car that's a couple model years older. I want to focus my attention here on the 40,000 and 50,000 mile buckets here, right on the bottom of this average here. So $28,000-ish and $26,000 respectively. When we think about kind of driving 10 to 15,000 miles a year, that difference here between the two in kind of $1,500 to maybe $2,000 could represent an entire year's worth of driving. And so this will be dependent on kind of the finer points of where your budget lies with this. And it's hey, is $1,500 or $1,500 in difference in price worth it to me for about 1 year's worth of driving the car. But I think this is a really interesting point to look at in this market. And this is going to be persistent whether you're looking at XLEs or limiteds or LEs, etc. Like, this is what it's all about. It's about finding out where the aggregate in the market is and seeing where these step downs are. And so this is where dealers are listing their cars at. What are people actually buying them at? Because when we look at this 40,000 mile column, they're listing all the way from, say, 28-ish thousand all the way up to 33,000. And we see in instances here where it's like, oh, they're listing their cars at $29,000, and that could range from something that's like 30,000 miles all the way to doubling that miles around 64,000 miles. What are people actually, what inventory is actually selling? When we go back here to toggle on sold listings, there's about 200 listings that have sold in the past 2 weeks. And it gives us kind of a clear look at around that 40, 50,000 mile range, where before we were seeing it go all the way up to $33,000 of what the dealers were asking for. But in reality, this is where the concentration of vehicles that are actually selling are lying here. It's right around this, chunking here of 36,000 miles, 47,000 miles for 27 to about 29,000. And this is really where it starts to zero in on where I think the sweet spot is here, in this example in particular. $27,000-ish for about 47,000 miles. Now, we went through this journey of going from well over 82,000 vehicles for sale for the 5th Gen RAV4 all the way down to that small set of listings that are out there to figure out where that sweet spot is. This is really the process that I go through when I'm evaluating the market for the car, starting with where is inventory levels going to where kind of the price that's being commanded for these respective features and options and trims, etc., all the way into try to zeroing in on where should I focus my attention and how should I be working through these price conversations with dealers. You're going to want to be using these comparable listings that are out there across the market to be a reference point in when that dealer slides across the table their first deal sheet with the whole makeup of the purchase price and any add-ons, etc. Feel free to ask any questions below in the comment section, but thanks so much for watching this video.